everyone. My name is Pizza Sotomayor. My pronouns are she and they. Thank you so much for coming to this Encuentro Virtual through Presente Media. Today, we will be talking with two amazing artists, queer Latinx artists, Daniel de Jesus and Gabe Loredo, who will be talking a little bit about representation and Latinidad and queerness. So as I mentioned, my name is Pizza Sotomayor. I'm a co-founder and journalist for Presente Media. And I'm so thankful to have these two incredible human beings here. So I'm going to hand it off to both of you to introduce yourselves.
I guess I could start. My name is Daniel de Jesus, and my pronouns are he and they. Um, I am an artist that is multidisciplinary, even though I know all artists are multidisciplinary. My work is mostly in the visual arts and in music. They kind of turn into a tapestry of different kind of conversions where I produce paintings, illustrations. Sometimes I animate, and then I also make records. And I've been making records since 2006 as a staple recording artist based here in Philadelphia, PA. And I've traveled with different bands, and I've toured all over the world. And I am a singing cellist, is how I describe myself. So I'm a songwriter, but I don't play the guitar. I play the cello. And I've been working very much in a lot of incredible queer spaces, more so in the last 6 years, with collaborations with folks from the Bearded Ladies Cabaret. Also working with David Antonio Cruz, who's an artist that a lot of his work explores identities of queerness and kind of this conversation of Latinx identity as well. And also working with writers like Andrew Albert Garcia, who is a playwright based in New York City, and I've been commissioned several times to produce work for him as well. And it just keeps going on, and I'm lots of wonderful projects coming up, and maybe we'll talk about it while we're here. But thank you for having me.
Cool. Hi, everyone. My name's Gabe. I use they, them pronouns. I recently graduated from art school, so I kind of feel like a baby artist, emerging artist. But I'm born and raised in Philly. And so I was surrounded by artists growing up and lots of folks who were connected with arts orgs in Philadelphia. So growing up, I was always, going to places like Philly Cam, mural arts programs, things like that. So art, like community art specifically, was definitely a part of my upbringing. And I guess my focus wound up being in fiber arts. And so I'm kind of drawn to that, like a bit more sculptural installation-based work. But I'm currently working as a graphic designer, an illustrator. I've got a couple projects wrapping up soon this month. So I'm very excited to start directing my energy towards picking up new skills in the coming months.
So I wanted to kind of start off by asking, talking to you all about who were the queer Latinx icons that influenced you in your life. And I know for me, it was definitely Walter Mercado. I wrote an article about how much he means to me. And, like growing up and just like not seeing anyone that was kind of like you, like the way that I describe him is like, he's like shiny, and I feel that same shine personally. And so I know for me, he was everything. And anytime I think about him, I just like smile so much. And I just think his positivity really like is something that I'm drawn to. So I wanted to ask you all, like, is there a queer Latinx icon growing up that really influenced you?
I'll answer that question with maybe something that might or might not be obvious, but I didn't really have any icons. So it was definitely my icons were always femme. Women in the arts. A lot of my art teachers were women, and I think that I really entered the world of the arts through a femme lens, and I learned about women artists before I heard, oh, that's a thing. Like, women artists are marginalized in their field, and I thought, oh, well, then I must have had a special education, because a lot of the people that I looked up to were all, women or femme presenting people. And like, as far as Latinx icons, because I came through a world of like classical music, there seemed to be a lack of representation there too. And I think um, it was really for me a thing of like, I felt like my education in queerness came much later, and then I started to discover those figures. One of those figures is an artist that I absolutely worship. Her name is Lenore Feeney, definite queer ancestor, incredible painter, set designer, of art, of Italian descent, but someone who was, half Argentinian, and who really had a space in the surrealistic world, and who I feel is my, a visual kin. We speak a very similar language visually. So I recommend diving deep into spaces where you may not think you would find, such divas. People have um Beyonce, or their Rihanna. Lenore Feeney is my Beyonce.
I guess I similarly did not have those icons to look up to. A lot of that came with like the rise of internet culture, right? And just like having more access to information and histories. But I really wasn't, maybe like by the time I got to high school is more when I was online. And I would kind of just watch the movies my friends were watching. But yeah, in my house, like there I certainly didn't see anyone that looked like me on television. And the media we were consuming was all English language media, right? So probably my queer icon when I was younger was my mom. My mother's an artist, and she had all these coffee table books on different artists. And there was a book on Frida, and there was a book on Basquiat. And like that was it for me. Like I would just go through those pages, and what excited me most was their artwork, but also was the photographs of the artists themselves, because I saw Frida's hair and it looked like my hair, and she had, hair between her eyebrows, and she wore suits. And that was like just those few images of her in those books are like what I held on to, not only because I felt like that was like that could be me later on in life, like that's what I might look like when I got older, but also that it was my mother's, and that it was something that she seemed to approve of, like that was okay in her eyes. And so that was really validating, seeing those books on the coffee table.
And do you all feel like things are getting better? Like there's more people that you can look up to, and that, if, we were born in this generation, like we might have had like more people to look up to? Or are you like, no? I think there's still no one.
No, I think there are definitely more people. Again, still educating myself all the time. Because I'm someone who really lives in my interest definitely lies in music and the visual arts, and there's plenty of people there that have always been there, but you don't really know them unless you really enter that space and you start to discover who they are. Um, and they don't exist in the periphery. It's just, I think we live in a time of internet age where we have a lot of information coming our way. So it used to be that things kind of bubbled up to the surface, and these were the people that were out there. But now that everyone has access to being a recording artist or being a writer and can publish their work immediately, we have lots of people to pull from, to admire. They don't have to be famous. They could be people that live in our own city. There's lots of people that I really admire, that are local, that are, doing their thing. And I think that that has given rise to more visibility, because all of these artists like ourselves have an outlet where, it used to be, to make a record, you needed a huge studio budget, you needed support. Someone like Boy George was rare, in that industry, because I'm obsessed with 80s music and I love Boy George. But uh, now, someone like me can spend, maybe maybe a small amount of money and make a record and release it, and people can hear it, and they write to me, and they talk to me, and we engage in a conversation, and it becomes a lot more about the music and the message, rather than anything about fame or having access to then have that conversation. So I think that's been the benefit. And I'm a huge fan of a lot of the queer artists in Philadelphia. Imagine all the other stuff that's out there that you can listen to. So as a musician, I highly recommend people to dig, become a connoisseur, become a culture vulture. And bandcamp.com, Spotify, all of it's there. It's just like, once you start looking for it, it comes to you. So I think, yeah, there's a lot more out there.
And I think there's something to be said too about the community-based aspect to things like performance and live music. And I mean, like the art scene as well, right? But yeah, for sure, I think that representation is definitely not in the mainstream. It's certainly something that you have to want to find. You have to put in the effort, to find those icons.
So are there certain like places that you look for more like info on like queer artists to follow? Like Daniel mentioned like Bandcamp, and I know like I find so many people on IG just like scrolling through and just like finding more people. So do you have like your place where you're like, this is where I find like my community online, or even in person?
For me, it's definitely IG. I mean, that's really, especially this past year, right? And for me, like I really only started to kind of get into my own queerness and like that sense of identity in the past like 5 or 6 years. So it's been kind of slow for me, getting to know different queer voices locally and otherwise. But yeah, IG has definitely been the place for me to find folks, see where their work is, with all the problems that IG comes with. Like it's been a great source for sure.
For me, it's been performing. I mean, being around performers and other people, and then that network leads to another network and leads to another network. Maybe I'm just old school, but I still do things in person. And of course, not during the pandemic. So I definitely looked at IG a lot. And I am someone who uses social media, but I think what I find much more impactful is when I work with a group, or it happens through the performing arts. Um, in the other thing is I've also tried to create a community of just knowledge. So for me, it's also been literature, podcasts, videos. All of these things are extremely valuable because I think there's a pantheon of history that we really need to know and understand where we are. So, Making Gay History is one of my favorite podcasts to listen to. It's a huge archive that you can access. And then there's also other podcasts that are by some of our favorite drag queens. And then they present stories and histories and people who have just been part of this legacy, but much more. My interest has definitely been much more political and in the arts, and people who are engaging in those spaces, um, and that's where I've been finding community mostly is through that combination, this kind of like wonderful network and thread that just tends to overlap and exist both in the virtual space and in real space.
So are there like particular books, films, something that like make you feel seen and like acknowledged, and like for the first time have like made you feel a certain kind of way? Because for me, it's definitely Pose. Like every time I watch Pose, I'm like, that's me and my friends on a weekend. Like it's just so great. I'm really sad that it was only 3 seasons. And I personally think it ended on a cliffhanger. No spoilers there. But yeah, I wanted to ask, like, do you have something like your go-to when you're like, you know, seeking that?
I think that queerness kind of comes in many different forms in terms of literature. It doesn't always come to you as like, this is a queer book. You know what I mean? Um, but I definitely know a lot of people who love to read like sci-fi stuff. I feel like there's a huge, you know, group of queerdos that love Harry Potter and like read all those books, and they found a lot of like things in there that that really resonated with them. But also in terms of other media, um, I usually, even though I know that there have been some conversations around Jenny Livingston and sort of her work as a documentarian, but Paris is Burning, I think, is a very important documentary. And I think that that was the first time that I felt seen, that I saw people that looked like myself who I understood. And I'm like, I know these, like, I know that feeling. I was not someone who participated in that world, but these were people of color who were very much like all the other people that I knew who were in these communities, and the stories that they told, I understood them. I felt that I understood those stories on a level that went beyond just what was on the surface. It was just like, I get you. The especially all those young Latino people who I'm sure had to deal with, machista culture, and then all those other people who were like kicked out of their homes. I mean, I didn't experience these things, but that fear and that space of like chosen family and what they were going through made a lot of sense to me. And I think that it's it's very it's very important for people to know that history and how dangerous it really was and is to be a trans person, or to be someone who's out and just living your life, and the things that they face, and not to romanticize it, but to let people to humanize it. And I think that's why that show Pose is so important. And also other films that really tell those stories would even be like the film Moonlight, which I thought was extremely triggering. I was just like, whoa, like this is a really tough film, but it's an important film. And I think that it humanizes, and it kind of brings it to a very personal level, very specific story that is just, this is really the story of someone just growing up essentially. But seeing that experience is just very it's very real. And I think those are films that I think not only educate us and give us a history, but also educate the people around us. And I think it brings that to light.
Yeah, I think something interesting that you mentioned, Daniel, is just like the specificity of those stories that are being told. Like, I think the worst thing is to see these stereotypes repeated that like try to, I don't know, give like a wide breadth of like queerness. Like they generalize queerness, and it's like you see the same stereotypes over and over again. But yeah, Moonlight was a great example of like really humanizing someone, and like telling the whole story, not just focusing on it through like this is a gay character. Yeah, in terms of feeling seen, myself represented in media, it's there's definitely been more a few more characters that like they're like second generation. They might not have a great handle on the language. They're in between like their own culture and this culture of whiteness. And that story has certainly been, I've seen, here and there. Like, I think Orange is the New Black is probably the first time the character Flocka, I was like, okay, like someone that like doesn't speak Spanish super well, like similar music to the stuff that I listened to growing up. I was like, okay, that's a more specific character. Like you're kind of humanizing them a little bit more. But also, yeah, like bringing up the point of science fiction. I'm currently reading The Left Hand of Darkness right now, that has a very interesting view on gender and gender roles. And like, that's just, like, I think part of queerness is also just thinking differently, right? Like thinking outside of the heteronormative paradigm of things. And like science fiction is a great way to kind of broaden your mind and broaden your scope.
Yeah, I definitely wanted to ask you all about your own work because you're all super talented and are also creating the representation that we all want to see. So I kind of just wanted to let y'all talk about the amazing things that you're doing. So please share with us, like, what's up? What's going on with your work?
A lot of my inspiration comes from like colonial Latin America and this idea of where, with this paradigm of Latinidad, something that only exists here in the United States, an experience that I have, and something that I think people from Latin America, it's not their experience, right? But it's something that comes from there. And so a lot of my work tries to deal with taking iconography, images, splices of things, and I research them, and then it kind of comes into this thing of like after all this research on subjects related to the colonial past, I then try to understand how did we get from the colonial past, what is the nucleus of who we are, and that's where I start, because that's the convergence of European conquest, enslavement, and we are the children of the Americas, right? And so in that larger scope, a lot of my work for many years really kind of looked at that. And also looking at sort of I was really interested in like mysticism. And so I did a whole album about or based on the work of Saint Teresa of Avila, who's really known as Santa Teresa de Jesus, which I thought was funny because I'm like, she has my last name. Um, and sort of like the veneration of these different, this kind of like very Catholic kind of ideologies that have then become identities that have then has been woven into this tapestry of Latinidad and what that is, and how these representations really kind of explain the synthesis of that. And so when it comes to the United States experience, um, I never really enter the contemporary lens. I always live in the past, and that's kind of where I dwell, and that's where I live. And so a lot of my work in music tends to be influenced like Baroque music, and then I fuse that with electronic music, and then I sing over that. And then visually, a lot of my work is inspired by that kind of colonial painting, like the School of Cusco, and like feather painting, and these other kinds of art forms that were considered crude for a long time are now being embraced and really studied because they come from indigenous traditions that have then been repurposed. And so that's really where I live in terms of my inspiration and what I do. What I'm doing now with my work is I'm really doing a lot more performing. I did a show. I've doing a lot of shows and films right now with the Bearded Ladies Cabaret, and I'm also part of their an advisory committee, and I've also part of an advisory committee for AMLA, and I teach young people visual art. And as a mentor, as a teacher, I'm a representation of, this is a teacher who's queer, and this is what they're teaching me, and then having that encounter, then I hope what they take away from it is like, that was my mentor, they taught me a lot of things, and not to feel like, to have that personal thing, then it dispels anything else that they've ever been taught, or it dispels anything they've seen on television. They've even become more sensitive. Like they'll say something, if something is silly or what they perceive of as dumb, they used to say, "Oh, that's gay," but whenever they were in my presence, they would say, they're like, "I'm really sorry. I didn't mean to say that." It's just like immediately apologize. So I think that these things are like just being present and just being part of their lives and just being a teacher has really been a part of what I do. And I just released an album this year called Kyrie, and that is a more complex record. You can read about it on my website. I think it does a better job of explaining kind of the idea behind that film, but it kind of takes on that mystical writing and other writings that are part of like and old world and this kind of living in the past through my work. And then I'm now in the middle of organizing a new record, which are interpretations of poems by Federico García Lorca, who wrote this piece called Sonetos de Amor Oscuro, and they were written to his gay lover. And that is those are the writings, and his homosexuality is what killed him. So this was inspired by a work I did with David Antonio Cruz, who's a visual artist who was a professor at Tufts in Boston, who honestly should be on this call too, because he has so much to say about being Latinx and being in this kind of world of visual arts. He's just like, shown at the Smithsonian, a Yale graduate, someone from North Philly, you know what I'm saying? Like, represent. So amazing person. But this work that I did was inspired by our collaboration. And so I just wrote more. And now that the poems are free domain in the United States, I feel comfortable making a formal recording and releasing them. So that's my next project, is this album. It's very dramatique, if I might say. Just imagine strings, despecho, and a lot of singing, a la Tori Amos / Bjork.
I honestly, the pandemic was kind of a pause for me in terms of art making. I think I just needed some time to recover after pumping out work for school. But what I was working on before that, and what I hope to pick back up on, is work that had to do a lot with just queer identity and exploring that for myself. A lot of my work was just kind of trying to figure out how I was comfortable presenting, what felt good to me. A lot of it was just images of like folks exploring their bodies. And then that kind of grew into, I was thinking about representation in the mainstream. And I'm also just, fascinated how things get like kind of co-opted and commercialized. So a lot of my work was kind of bridging the gap of like, okay, what would it look like to have something so personal and intimate be commercialized and like printed en masse? And so, a lot of the work is kind of dealing with like patterns and imagery that speaks to queerness, but then on clothing, on packaging, on things like that. And then another thread that I was working on was this idea of like archiving our stories. I've done some work in museums and collections, and I'm just like fascinated by the idea of how we store and organize data, and then how we in turn present that, and who was presenting it and who was telling those stories. So my last project was actually this catalog of queer objects, and this catalog that's like handwritten of the person who owns the object telling their story about the object, because we don't often, or I don't often see that, especially in formal spaces like museums. So that's a thread I hope to pick up on at some point for sure. I right now it kind of exists as like a skeleton, like the objects are just my own objects, or with made up stories and things like that. But yeah, I would love to turn that into some kind of community project where people actually submit their work and submit their writing, to have some kind of display that tells these stories in a way that feels more intimate.
Wow, you're both so talented and amazing. Yeah, I mean, y'all forgot to mention that we're working on a film together, though. We're working on an animated short film called, currently untitled, Latinx COVID-16-19 Project, with a queer protagonist who's non-binary and trying to find a COVID vaccine in like this Alice in Wonderland world. So that will be coming soon. Anyway, so my last question for both of you is, where can we find you, and where can we follow you and see your work?
You can find me on Instagram and Facebook at De Jesus Cello. DejesusCello. And I have a website, danieldejesus.art, as opposed to a .com, .art. And yeah, all my material is there. And Bandcamp, Spotify, iTunes, the whole 9 yards. It's just putting it out there.
You can find me on my website, GabeLoredo.com. And that's pretty much the only place. My Instagram has been set to private and will probably remain private for at least a while.
Okay, thank you both so much. It's been such a pleasure to speak with both of you. And please check out Presente Media, presentemedia.org.
Thanks so much, guys. This was awesome.
Thank you.